Welcome back, alumni and friends. Welcome, students. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I'm Joe Helbley. I'm the Dean of the Thayer School of Engineering, and it's wonderful to have you with us to begin the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the founding of this esteemed and distinguished School of Engineering. It is my pleasure to introduce the first session in our Alumni Weekend festivities by introducing the moderator of this first session. Catherine Sellman, a member of the Thayer School Board of Overseers, is a Thayer graduate, having earned her BA in Engineering Sciences from Dartmouth in 1993 and an MBA from the Anderson School of Business at UCLA in 2000. Before entering a career in finance, Catherine worked as an engineer for an environmental consulting firm based both in Washington, D.C. and in Telluride, Colorado. After working for several firms in the field of investment management, Catherine decided to be an entrepreneur and strike out on her own, founding an investment management firm, Aperimus Capital, in 2008. And worth noting, I think, as an interesting side note, in this year where the Thayer School, actually, okay, the news is from June 2016, but it's still within 12 months, where the Thayer School of Engineering became the first comprehensive research university in the country to graduate a majority female class of engineers. Something of which, or for which we, and I hope all of you, are quite proud. It's worth noting that Catherine, in fact, in founding her investment management firm, founded one of the first or the first investment management firm run entirely and founded entirely by women. One of the very few, right. But Catherine continues at Aperimus and has, for the past several years, been a very engaged and contributing member of our Board of Overseers here at the Thayer School. And please join me in welcoming her to the podium to moderate the panel. Catherine.
Thank you, Dean Helbley, and thank you all for being here today to kick off this celebration. I really think about it as a conversation among stakeholders, of which we all are part of that group. To put, 150 years is a long time, and to put it into perspective, 1867, I think, was the same year that Alaska was purchased for $7 million. So that's a heck of a long time. I've had the pleasure to get to know the three panelists here, and they really represent what Thayer is all about, certainly to me and hopefully to all of you. So for the next hour, we're going to talk about the impact that Thayer has had on the world, on lives all over the world. And with a nod to the deep history of the liberal arts among us and around us, we're going to begin and end with a little bit of poetry. So to begin, I'm going to do my best to introduce the three of these wonderful people in as close to haiku brevity as possible. And for those of you who know them, that is no easy task. We'll start with Margie. Margie Ackerman has a PhD in biology from MIT and joined the faculty here in 2011 with a focus on protein engineering. She has built the Ackerman Lab during her time here, and actually it's been described to me by some of her grad students as just the Willy Wonka lab of anything you'd ever want to do anything in biotech. It just sounds like an extraordinary interdisciplinary place, very collegial place to do work. And as a testament to her work and her team, the Ackerman Lab is working with one of the very few blood samples from the one vaccine that has shown any efficacy against the HIV virus. So that's a centerpiece of her work today. She's loved by her students, and she's been described as having incredibly high standards, an elegant way with the written word. And one of the quotes I read about her that I particularly love is that if you don't come to the discussion with ideas, please bring very good questions. So we'll move on to Tillman Gerngross. He got his PhD at the Technical University of Vienna in molecular biology and joined the faculty here at Thayer in 1998. Although he began his work in bioplastics, He had a bit of a gear change, which he spoke about in the presidential lecture, which he recently gave here, and has focused his efforts since then on first figuring out how to bioengineer yeast to produce very complex, very specific human glycoproteins. And Dean Hutchinson and Tillman together founded the company Glycify, which was sold to Merck in 2006. And like a loaf of bread, Glycify Hall also has risen through yeast. He recently, he started another company called Adimab that also uses bioengineered yeast to make very specific antibodies, which is an essential piece of the drug development puzzle. He was recently elected to the National Academy of Engineering, and in his spare time, he runs a racetrack in Canaan, New Hampshire, as one does.
I don't run it.
Ashifi Gogo is our last panelist. He hailed originally from Ghana and got his math and physics degree undergraduate from Wentworth College in Walla Walla, Washington. And then he was attracted to Thayer because of Professor Garmeyer's lab studying how lasers may transmit high-speed data at fiber optic speeds. He also had a bit of a pivot here at Thayer and moved into becoming the first innovation fellow here at Thayer and got his PhD in 2011, I believe, 2010, 1 year after he founded the company that he is, of which he's CEO, called Sproxil. And it's a remarkable company that's addressing the issue of counterfeit medicine. It includes an app on one's phone that can scan a bottle of medicine and tell the end user whether it's counterfeit or not. And to put that into perspective, that claims the lives of about 700,000 people every year. He has operations in East and West Africa and India today. He's one of the Fortune 40 under 40, among many other accolades. And in his spare time, he teaches at Columbia University a class on innovation and technology management. So no slouches here to my left. The way I want to organize this hour, and I've encouraged them to interrupt each other, I will also leave some time for a couple questions at the end. We're going to talk a little bit about the past, Thayer present, and Thayer future. So I want to begin with a little bit of storytelling about the past and about your past here. And Ashifi, I really wanted to start with you. From our conversations, each one of you had a moment of change or shift in your direction that Thayer, the organization of Thayer, really supported. And I wanted to first explore that. Ashifi, could you talk to us a little bit about what that was like, that moment when you realized it wasn't lasers, it was something else entirely, and maybe you didn't know what that was. But what was the role of Thayer during that time?
Sure, I'm happy to comment. I came to Thayer to the PhD program thinking that every grad student was supposed to walk in knowing very little and walk out having derived E equals MC squared or such equivalent within their field, having a profound discovery within 5 years was what grad school was about. And so I came in here with a background in quantum optics from my undergrad at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, and spent about 1.5 to 2 years working on lasers, and then discovered that what I was working on had been worked on 10 years ago in Seattle, and companies had been built and crashed, and I was not really, this was not the E equals MC squared that I was thinking I was working on. So I felt a little sad, as you might expect when your research is scooped. And as a way to pick myself up, I started entering ideas into business plan competitions and presenting and getting a sense of what that would be like to take an idea, turn it into a venture, seek investors, deliver value to shareholders and society. And it was a lot of fun. And so as I was picking up the pieces from my research project at the time, I came up with an idea of a friend at the time to serialize products, put unique codes on them so they could be tracked through the supply chain and verified at a point of sale so consumers can avoid harm. And bit by bit, that became what today is Sproxil that has been used over 55 million times around the world. Through the process, the Innovation Fellowship Program was introduced, and that was really a lifesaver for my academic career here, in that Thayer is really good at not having silos, and so you could go get a real-world problem and then pick and choose which areas of expertise are applicable to the problem, design a solution, and then go see if the solution works in the real world. And so by having that with the entrepreneurial training that I was able to get through the program, it really gave me a complete kit bag to go tackle real-world problems.
And so, Tillman, you also had a bit of a switch here. I know you spoke about that briefly, but could you share with the audience a little bit about what that was like, and maybe Thayer's role, the people here and specifically who helped you make that shift?
Yeah, I mean, it was very similar to what Ashifi was just describing. So I came here in '98 with the intent or the expectation to work on these biopolymers, which are made by microorganisms that you can engineer to take up sugar and convert them into an aliphatic polyester that can then be used for whatever you want to use plastic for. So that was the idea. And then within a year or so after arriving here, did the analysis to look at what the actual impact would be if one were to implement that at a large commercial scale. And the net result is that if you want to emit more greenhouse gases, use more land, use more fossil fuel, it's a great idea. But if you want to do something that has a benefit to the environment, it's a pretty bad idea. And so this is sort of, it's a scary moment because there are expectations placed upon you as a young faculty member, and you sort of have to figure out what you're going to do next. And this is, I think, where the culture here was extremely supportive, I should say, to say, okay, he wants to do something different. And I felt, just in general, very broad support from the faculty, from the dean at the time, to do something different, which ended up being a success story. But again, you don't know that at the beginning.
Sure.
When you're sitting in your office alone and say, what am I going to do next? These are lonely moments, and they're scary to be honest. But I never felt that Thayer wasn't on my side and wasn't going to support me, and so I feel very good about it.
One thing you mentioned when we spoke too, I mean, I guess I have a vested interest, but you said the Board of Overseers also had a role to play.
Yeah, and I keep on saying that to them. I don't think they really listen, but what
They're here. They're right there. You can
okay, now listen. Listen once and for all. For people on the faculty, they're very much typically sort of, it's their peers and the students.
Yeah.
But the overseers, and in particular the Thayer overseers, bring a perspective to the academic enterprise that is informed by how the world works and the real world, right? And so they always bring this dimension that I always thought extremely helpful, and it sort of balanced the strict emphasis on academic metrics of success. And very early on, again, the overseers were extremely supportive in supporting the venture that I ended up going into, and something you don't forget. And so in my particular case, I found them to be a great resource that again really care about the institution. And so there's that care, but at the same time, they bring a perspective that you don't normally find in academia. So I think bringing that balance for me was extremely helpful.
And that, Margie, that brings me to you. When you told me about your lab, and from what I've heard out in certainly the graduate student community, that among the three, you have not started your own corporate enterprise. However, you seem to have this incredible way of pushing scientists out into the world who are engaged in translational research and have an interest in entrepreneurship. Is that something that's sort of magic in your lab? Is it something that you're supporting, or is it the people that are attracted to your lab, or what's your role in that effort?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a combination of many things. So there is generally a student-centric and individual-centric environment in that, as you've already heard, when people can identify their needs, the institution does everything it can, and the people within the institution do everything they can to sort of facilitate development and growth and expanding into having an impact on the world. And I think, my lab is young, so we haven't sent that many folks out, but I'm tremendously proud of the scientists that we've graduated. And it's, yesterday I heard about an undergrad researcher in the group recently is accepted to Harvard's systems biology program. And I look forward to a future where there's a cohort of alumni from my group, much like the cohorts that you're part of, or Tillman's students.
It only gets better, Margie.
Yeah.
As they get seasoned out in the world,
Yeah.
more of them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they interact with each other, and they interact with people that you know from other parts of the Thayer community. And I think that's been really instrumental in sort of building the Thayer into the growing, vibrant place for research and enterprise that it is today.
And it sounds to me that your lab is really unusual in the sense that it's pulling in people, interesting people from all over campus. Could you just talk a little bit about what that's like in practice and why that is?
So I think we've had graduate students from 5 different PhD programs work in the group at various points in time. And so part of that has been necessity driven because we've had that much space in the Wonka factory.
That's the new name.
But it's been really exciting to see how students with a background in chemistry and those who have undertaken the first 2 years of a medical degree can interact with each other and all kind of cross-train each other. So whereas we have engineering graduate students who were life science majors as undergrads, we have life science PhDs who were engineers as undergrads, and so the boundaries within the lab have been really flexible, just like they've been flexible and permeable through different graduate degree departments, which has contributed greatly to what we've been able to accomplish and the culture that we have.
And you two particularly would know better than I do, but that sounds extremely unusual in academia to have that sort of fluidity across disciplines. And Ashifi, I imagine there's more to what Sproxil does than developing an app, which would make you quite interdisciplinary as well. Can you talk a little bit about all the different fields you've had to pull in to solve the problem that you're solving today?
Sure. When I started the company out of my master's and PhD research here at Thayer, I didn't really expect that I would know too much about government relations. That's not something that is heavily advertised as an area of emphasis here at Thayer.
Sure.
But when we had an opening in Nigeria to help patients who at the time had been rocked by a manufacturing issue that unfortunately ended up killing over 80 infants from teething syrup that was tainted, we had to work with the government to be able to introduce our offering and for me also to be able to do my PhD research to graduate. And so we had to figure out how to get a regulatory agency on the other side of the planet to work with PhD candidates who'd never run a company before to protect 160 million patients with technology that has never been used in any other country. And so just figuring out how to put those pieces together, how to position yourself, how to understand the landscape. There were some inputs I was able to get from Thayer professors at the time. Professor Guymeyer was, I believe, a Jefferson Fellow at the State Department for a year, so that was really helpful in bringing in some, at least from the U.S. government perspective. Professor Saibenko, who was also instrumental in my career here, was able to bring in some of the work that he does with the DoD, with the government in the U.S. as well. So just understanding how to position oneself and get the green light was really helpful. There was also interactions we had to have with large pharmaceutical companies, which going in, you'll think this is probably the happiest place to work and make all these life-saving pills. It's a big organization, and just learning how to pull the right levers to be able to get the permission required was also something I ended up picking up some tips from Thayer professors as well.
And as you grow Sproxil, is it a platform for other things, or are you just focused on pharmaceuticals?
Currently, our largest market is in India, and our largest target industry is the beverage industry. Counterfeit alcohol has a tremendous impact on millions of lives. And in India, it turns out that more often than not, when you toss your liquor bottle, it never actually makes it to the landfill, nor the recycling center. It gets reused and repurposed and put back in the marketplace. And so that's something that we address now more comprehensively using a loyalty program. We also discovered that companies generally do not like to admit that they have a counterfeiting problem. It's not very healthy for the stock price. And it doesn't do wonders on your public image either. And so we developed a loyalty offering that works exactly the same way that the anti-counterfeiting offering works, but then there's no guilt or shame that comes with the client's brand, and so they're able to advertise a loyalty promotion to be able to get consumers to make sure that they're authenticating their products and getting the right goods. To date, we've given away a Mercedes-Benz, which sadly I was not allowed to enter in that promotion. We've also given away over $3 million in cell phone prepaid talk time to over 20 million consumers in India.
Excellent. So that's a little bit about the past. Those are the stories that I kind of wanted to bring out of each one of you. And as we move to think about what Thayer is today, Tillman, you brought up an interesting point when we spoke, which is organizations are what they celebrate. And I just wanted to hear from all of you, what is it from your experience? We'll start with you, Tillman. What is it that the Thayer today celebrates about your work?
I don't know. You have to ask Joe.
What do you think he celebrates? What do you think? What's
I think there is the traditional academic institution measures impact in certain ways. That's typically publications, number thereof, how many citations, and that's one way to measure something. And I think as an engineer, you have a slightly different obligation to society and to your profession, which is touching people's lives, like we've heard from my colleagues here. And so I think there's an openness to considering other metrics of success that I think Thayer has openly endorsed, as evidenced by this panel. And in general, I feel the work that I've done is viewed as being something that has had impact and hopefully will continue to have impact. And it's viewed as a contribution. And so I think that's not necessarily true for all academic institutions. And I certainly feel that Thayer has done a very good job in recognizing that there are different ways of impacting the world beyond sort of your traditional academic metrics.
Is that something you were aware of before you came here, or is that you just have to see it to believe it?
Again, I think part of it is the overseers. I mean, the overseers bring a different view of the world to the conversation, and it's not something I had recognized prior to coming here, but it's certainly something that I experienced once I was here, and had a very, very positive effect on me, at least.
Super. And Margie, would you add to that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it may sound boring, but there's a practical outlook here that distinguishes how things work here from other places, in that where other departments think of engineering in smaller bins and buckets, and there are very traditional definitions for what it means to be a chemical engineer that would place some of my most promising students kind of outside or on the fringe of that community. Those types of differences are valued and seen as improving and enabling new work to take place. And I think, as Tillman said, sort of a focus and valuing impact also has allowed us to do work that we might not have been able to do elsewhere. So I think of what my lab recently expanded to a second site over in the Remsen building across campus, and that was not for traditional academic laboratory research. It was probably something that we could have spun out as a contract research organization, but that sounded not like something I wanted to manage at the time. But approaching Joe and folks here about whether there was a possibility for us to acquire a second site in which to conduct somewhat a-traditional research as a bit of a service, but also as a means to advance state-of-the-art knowledge in terms of how protective vaccines might work. That was something that they said yes to, and said yes to enthusiastically. I didn't have to convince them it was engineering. I didn't have to convince them it was an academic enterprise. They saw, I think, the potential impact that that site would have, and they enabled it to happen.
Super. And Ashifi, I know you're not on the faculty here, but what would your answer to that question be? You know, you've talked a little bit about your ongoing interaction with Thayer, but what is it that Thayer celebrates about you? What's your sense of that?
I found it very encouraging that Thayer was flexible. I remember spending several days in Dean Helvey's office as if you start a company and it's doing very well and it's really exciting, and then you have homework on the other hand that's gathering dust, and you kind of begin to get ideas that are not necessarily germane to graduating anytime soon.
But it's fun.
It's all fun, right? So between my parents, my dad has a PhD, and all my sisters have one, and their spouses have one. So it's sort of an academic family that I come from. And Dean Helvey, there was no way I was dropping out of school to start a company. But rather than come at it with a very forceful approach, the Thayer helped me accomplish both goals by being able to get the training that was required to run a corporation and grow it, as well as being able to look very deeply into the technical aspects of the offering that we're developing and create academic work that would grant a PhD. So it was a very fluid time because the program was being introduced. It wasn't always clear what it was about, but we took it as stride, and it worked out really well. So that flexibility is not necessarily what you think of when you look at a long-standing academic institution.
Sure. I think it's quite unusual, and that's definitely something I've heard from the faculty and students, that almost allows this collective wisdom to occur between fields that would otherwise be lost. So we're going to move a little bit into the future here, and what I think about is, the people in this room are going to continue to have impacts on the world for the rest of their lives, and we'll start with the panelists. When you think out 10 years, what is the single most important impact that you want to have made, looking back on those 10 years? We'll start with you, Tillman.
I think for me there are two dimensions. Again, I want to hold engineers accountable to what the profession ought to be about, which is impacting and touching people's lives. And in my particular area, it's like, how many drugs do you have that have touched a person's life and changed it? It's very powerful. I mean, there are diseases we can't currently treat. And if you help in some way to bring something to the marketplace that, when administered to a patient, that you currently cannot cure or at least manage the disease, all of a sudden you can, that's a very, very powerful thing. And the more of those you can touch, the better. And so I think that's certainly one area that I think is one where I would, try to establish some benchmark where I would like to be.
Go ahead.
The second one is, you touch people's lives in the context of both your academic work in the classroom and the effect that you have on your students at a very important time of their life, and where they make big changes and big realizations. And so I think there's that opportunity to have impact. And the people that work with me, my employees, they, across the various companies, there are 200 people that go to work every day there, and to create an environment where they're valued, where they understand what they're doing is important, why it's important, what their contribution is in the grand picture. Work is a big part of people's lives. They spend a lot of time there, and if that's an unpleasant experience and merely one that you have to do to make money so you can support your family, it's not a great life. So making their work life as something that they enjoy doing. They understand that it's important and why it's important and all that. So I think I hope to have changed their lives, and wherever they go afterwards, they bring with them sort of a vision of how it could be. The students, similar story, and then ultimately professionally, show me the drugs or show me the lives that you have directly touched through something that you have created, or to say it differently, that wouldn't exist without you. And so anyway, those are the three that I would.
And Margie, what about you? When you look back 10 years, is it the work of your graduate students as they go off as a lever into the world, or is it the Thai trial progress, or what's most important to you?
It probably will depend how it turns out.
Let's be optimistic.
I'm always I'll name two. I think 10 years from now, I hope that I'll be able to point to specific things that our research program did that helped enable licensure of a safe and effective HIV vaccine, right? That would be an accomplishment that I'd be tremendously proud of. I think in terms of trickle down or more direct impacts, I think, as Tillman alluded to, not treating all the people that come through the classroom or the lab as widgets that we're stamping degrees on and sending them out to go do something else, but as individuals with strengths and weaknesses that we can project onto their interests and future plans and figure out, well, what are the skills that they don't have now that are going to benefit them given their stated interest in X, Y, or Z, and how can they develop that in the context of their coursework or their experiments or their experiences while they're a student here or a trainee. So I will always be very proud of working those sort of developmental milestones and goals into the context of a research program that seeks to have impact in other ways.
It's interesting, that there is this debate sometimes between the liberal arts and the sciences and the humanities in general. And what I was really struck by with all of you is the interest in the human element and the creation of culture. And here, your art form is science or business development and science. But these human considerations are so important to make that impact. And I think, as I reflect over what I've learned from you and my own experience here, it's that integration of caring about the whole person, but also developing best-in-class scientists, and that it's that powerful combination. They're not mutually exclusive. If you're a top-of-class scientist, you can also be a humanist.
It's true, but there are certain institutions that I think deliberately try to bring out one aspect and don't care so much about the other. And Margie and I have been at one of those institutions together at a time in the past. It's just a different focus, right?
You can guess.
And I think there is something special to considering both aspects.
That comes clear in so many conversations. It's that combination that's particularly powerful about the Thayer community. And Ashifi, one thing we did not speak about, but I am curious about, is what is the culture of Sproxil like? As a company, when you articulate what it's like to work there and the culture that you've built, what is Sproxil from that perspective?
I like to think of it as a highly efficient United Nations. It's very diverse.
Whoa.
Wow.
United Nations that...
There's a position for you.
Miracle.
We're a for-profit corporation by virtue of the work we do in emerging markets overseas. In the pharmaceutical industry, we have won a lot of awards as a social enterprise. And so we have that as a central theme within the corporation. People really care that when someone walks into a pharmacy in a country they've never visited before, they're depending on the service working to make a highly impactful decision on whether they should buy an anti-malaria for their child or not. And so there's a lot of care and attention to detail among the culture. And there's also a meritocracy that I think I bring from the academic standpoint that you may not always find in corporations. And if you have a good idea, encourage direct conversations with whomever can get the idea off the ground. And that's something that has taken a lot of work to get accepted among the various cultures. For instance, in India, probably the hardest case. It's hard for people to say no to a foreigner in India. So everything is yes, and then when you end up getting what you asked for, if they had said no, it would have saved a lot of time, right? And so to go from that culture to say, no, you have a great idea, let's work on it, let's adapt the product to cater to your insights here and see if it works or not, it's something that is alien a little bit, which it has taken a little bit of time to knead in. So it's still a work in progress. Obviously, I would like for people to be more vocal within the organization, but that's something that at least I appreciate has generated some results already.
So we're going to move even farther into the future here. And just imagine that you're queen or king of this organization, and you're passing
Which one, Thayer?
Thayer.
Oh.
Sorry, Joe. Bear with me. And in 20 years, although someone who, one future dean of Thayer may be in this room today, you never know.
Current dean of Thayer.
Future. So if you're queen or king here, and in 20 years you're passing the scepter off to the next steward of this wonderful place. And let's go back to the haiku form, because we could go on here, but one or two pieces of advice that you would tell them so that the culture of this place, even as it grows, can stay special and maintain that quality that is really unique to the institution. We'll start with you, Margie.
Oh, boy. I don't know. I guess I'm excited about our prospects for growing. It's been an exciting place to be here now with new faculty, new students. And so expanding the size of our institution, I think, will be really exciting over the course of the next 20 years to expanding our impact on the world. And so I think I'm looking forward to seeing that impact increase and the types of successes fostered by having the flexible common culture here continue and move us in directions that we're not even anticipating at this moment, right? Same as other folks have described fundamental changes, maintaining and fostering and continuing to grow that culture of letting people, letting the promising people we've brought into the fold figure out what it is that they can truly drive and lead to have an impact on.
And Tillman, what would your words of wisdom be?
I'm not really sure what your question is, but I'll say something, okay? And I think we talk about culture, the culture of this place. Culture is people. You clean out the people. It's not the walls don't have any culture, right? It's the people. And then I think when you talk about people, I think from my point of view, there's nothing more important than leadership. And so I'll go right back and really give Joe a lot of credit. I mean, Joe has been instrumental, I think, in not just maintaining, but really helping us define what this culture is. And so what I would say is keep doing what you're doing. And it's worked really well. And so anyway, those are my thoughts.
So that was the answer.
And I don't want to be the
question.
king. What's that?
That was the answer to my question.
Okay, good.
And Ashifi, how about you? If you were, the keeper of the zoo here, what would you say to the next zookeeper who's presiding over possibly a much larger institution?
So I don't really have an answer, but I do have a sense of what the question is. From the tiny keyhole that we're able to peek at the world at Sproxil, we've realized that the world is catching on to this engineering thing. There's a lot of talent overseas, and as part of the academic journey here that we're going through, we're also training students to become professionals in the workplace. And the more complex the problems are, the more diverse the thinking has to be to get to an answer, perhaps the more collaboration required. It seems to me that the future will depend on those kinds of people who have that kind of training and background, more so than those who don't have as much lateral thinking in their training. And so one of the things I would focus on, or at least better define where the areas of improvement are things around collaboration, complex system solution development, and helping students really get out of their shells, perhaps, and think really broadly about which fields outside, perhaps even engineering, they need to add to their complement to be able to thrive in tomorrow's world. I wish I took a psychology class when I was here, because I have to read people, and I have had to learn to do that on the job. But if that was something that was even on the radar, that would have made a difference for me.
Sure. Okay, so I wanted to leave a little bit of time here at the end for questions from the audience. I don't know if we have a mic floating around, or if you just want to raise your hands. You there.
So as you guys were talking about expanding Thayer further, one question I had, when I was here before McLean was built, I felt like Thayer felt kind of like a family. Many of the students knew each other and knew all the professors and vice versa. And I was worried about expanding the institution and keeping that feel. It seems like you guys have done a great job with Thayer continuing to be a collaborative, multidisciplinary institution. So I'm curious how you managed to maintain that as you've grown, and how you plan to continue to, as you're the whole size again. So my thought came up from what you were saying, but maybe whoever wants to do this.
Well, we might have another panelist who just joined the discussion.
I might answer a little bit. So, my office has a cranberry sauce stain on the carpet from Thayer's Thanksgiving dinner, where families of all the affiliates of the school are still invited to now smush ourselves into the hall to enjoy a Thanksgiving meal with each other. So yes, it's gotten a little tighter. Sometimes my kids eat in the office and make a mess. But I think those are aspects of Thayer's community that are unique to being here, that the culture is more inclusive. So it's not that that's a celebration for students or that's a celebration for faculty or staff, but it's all in and it's all family members. So I think we'll keep up those traditions as we grow, and they'll contribute to maintaining some of the wonderful aspects about being a small place that we've had.
Yes, you, please.
So one of the themes that I've run into in the last, say, 6 months in some conversations in the engineering game, including some other universities, is that engineers are coming out of school as wonderful material scientists or gene splicers or whatever, but they don't know how to do engineering. And so the question is, as Thayer School advances its size, impact, field of study, how do we assure that the graduates are people who are able problem solvers and can deal with real-world engineering problems in the complex technical and social and economic marketplace of 10, 20, 50 years from now? Short question, long answer.
Maybe I'll answer a
Yeah,
little
please.
bit. So my training was in chemistry in some ways, primarily, and so I thought I can teach thermodynamics when I get here. That's like the fluxes of molecules, but actually teaching thermodynamics, and you probably had the same experience,
Keep going.
was that we're not the structure of our undergraduate program fosters that cross engineering silo thinking. So we're not teaching thermo just to people who are thinking at the molecular scale. We're also teaching thermo, it's the same class, to folks who will go work in power plants. And so the fact that we don't have all those foundational courses broken out into specialties is a unique part that's built into the structure of our undergraduate degree. And I don't think that's going to change, and that will be one way that we continue to foster that sort of cross-disciplinary experience and thinking and the ability to sort of lateralize from one's experience long term.
And the project courses where here's the problem, go solve it, and form teams around it, analyze it. I mean, that's not going to go away. And I would just add one more thing. This discussion about size, I think where the world is going, the option of having stayed at the small size that we were, I don't think would have worked. I think that what we had to increase to sort of have critical mass in certain areas. And now, for example, in our area, Margie, we have Carl, we have myself. When I came, there was nothing. And now there is something. And I think we can build upon that. And I don't think you can do it with one person in one area. So if you want to make a commitment to certain areas, you need to have a certain critical mass around that and need to be willing to sustain that. And I would say there's been a huge benefit amongst the grad students that we had in postdocs, because there is a lot of cross-fertilization. We used to run joint lab meetings.
We still run it, you just don't come.
Oh. So we still do it.
Andy, go ahead.
So, how can we better encourage entrepreneurship? I think one of the interesting things about engineers coming out of Dartmouth is the practical approach, right, and the ability to apply it in a real-world sense. At the same time, how do you think about velocity of people who are actually going out and starting businesses and being part of a new enterprise? What do you think we can do to accelerate that? Maybe I'll put it to you.
Sure. I think there are a couple of options. Entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily require starting a new venture. And so if one is able to join a larger corporation, pick up some tools of the trade, because I learned how to do business on the streets of Lagos, Nigeria, making tons of mistakes and recovering. It's a brutal experience. It's not recommended. Don't try it at home. But there are shorter ways to get that kind of training. You understudy someone in business, and then take the next step, work on an idea, and explore it. I think what Thayer could do is, through the alumni network, give students a better weighted sense of the risks around starting a new business, as well as the opportunities, and give the advice that helps avoid some of the potholes that students might fall into, to give students not only good ideas, but every now and then maybe resources that could help them get from one stage to another, a customer introduction, an advisor that could be instrumental. Those are some of the things that within the community of people who have just left Thayer, as well as those who are 30 years out, can reinvest into the students. I remember as the first PhD Innovation Fellow, there was at the time this discussion on whether the school is training people to start companies or training people to know how to start companies, and then it's the option of the students to go out there and decide what to do. I think if we can make it acceptable that one of the outcomes that is celebrated is if students start companies, and they may not go anywhere. There shouldn't be much of an aversion to having students get into the entrepreneurial game. You can't really control the timing when you start a company. You go when the wind is strongest, and in some cases it might precede a student's graduation. In some cases it might come after the student graduates. But if we're a little flexible, that might help make it less risky, or the perception may not be as strong that you have to wait, or you can't do this till this stage, and so on. It's probably a broader conversation. I'm happy to talk more about it.
I mean, I would just add, there is a in the current culture, if you look at colleges and universities across the country, they all have some form of entrepreneurship center, pitch competition. It goes on and on and on, right? And I'm not sure if it really does a lot of good. In my experience, at the end of the day, an entrepreneurial experience starts with insight. You need to know something. And yes, you can run the country without knowing anything, but you can't start companies. You can't start companies without knowing anything. And so I think our job is to really help our students analyze complex situations, develop insight, and once you have insight, then you can start figuring out, gee, this is how this works. If I did this, then this could happen. And I think that's very much what we do here anyway. But I think pushing too hard on this business plan competitions and all this stuff, I'm not sure that that's such a wonderful idea, is my view.
Yes, in the back.
One of the things that Ashifi mentioned was flexibility, and I've heard that term used by others. And flexibility was one of the key things that attracted me to Thayer eons ago. I was wondering if there was anything else we need to do from a branding perspective for Thayer, so that people would realize that this is an amazing institution that is a flexible institution.
If there are any marketing geniuses in the room,
Are you asking about undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, or all of the above? Or
I'm thinking graduate students.
I think as someone who was a grad student here, one of the things that perhaps overshadows the experience here is the location. And if there was a way to accept that, yes, there's a lot of snow, it's really cold, but, and then, put the lesser known facts about Thayer, that might be a way to bring it up. I had no idea that perhaps because the program is not as large as other programs, that there will be this much flexibility here. Because you think of a large program where you have a lot of options, it's a smaller program, so you have fewer options, right? It's actually not necessarily the case. So I'm on the Dean's Council, working with the Dean and his leadership to get some feedback from young alumni on some of the messaging that goes out. But we're certainly, we'll be grateful for some inputs on the marketing side.
I think it's certainly true that what serves students well once they're here doesn't always help us get them in the door or help them know what the experience here might be like. So I think, for example, about not being listed in all kinds of discipline-specific graduate school ranking lists does us a disservice in terms of the population of students that are Googling about looking for where to apply. But on the flip side, the fact that we're not is one of our defining attributes that imparts that flexibility that people have found to be such a valuable part of their experience.
And as a faculty, if you have managed to develop a reputation in the field, you have a lot of autonomy in picking students and attracting them to your lab on an individual basis without having to go through a bunch of committees that then allow you to access that student. So I think I remember in my days that really helped a lot, that you could have that direct dialogue and find the right students that are a good fit and that will benefit from this particular set of circumstances.
And I would say, just to add something there on the undergraduate side, I mean, some of your grad students obviously are coming from Dartmouth undergrad, that I think it needs to be part of Dartmouth's message, that there's this extraordinary engineering school across from Tuck that has access across all of these different fields. I think that's an important part of Dartmouth's message as well, that helps feed what's going on here that's so special. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, in the back.
Let me try and phrase this right. We're talking about working on the front end, attracting students by educating them about what they can find it there. I wonder if there would be a way to do that sort of bass backwards by educating
think that's a great point.
I-
Ashifi, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I would say actually, if you could do that to highlight the faculty success. As a graduate student, I'm looking for a successful mentor. So at the graduate level, boy, if I could study under Tillman and start a $400 million company, I mean, hey, where do I sign? I'm showing up. So
I've got the paperwork right here.
They're hiring.
So if you profile the faculty and show the breadth of what they're able to do, not only will you gain critical technical skills, but should you discover something really interesting, you could launch a startup, or you could go into government relations, or you could, that would be a strong ad for graduate students, in my opinion.
And some, for example, our lab's website maintains a list of all of our alumni and where they are. So while there may not be a top-down data repository for all of that information, it is valuable as students look at where they'd like to go to see, well, how have the people who have beaten this path before me done? How do they describe their interests, and what are their outcomes at the end of their degree?
Okay. So we're running out of time here, but I wanted to close with a few lines. Remember, I threatened poetry at the beginning and the end. A few lines from a favorite poet of mine, the Nigerian poet Ben Okri, as an invocation for Thayer's next 150 years and to kick off this conversation this weekend. Only free people can make a free world. Infect the world with your light. Press forward the human genius. Our future is greater than our past. Thank you all for being here today, and I'll see you all out.